Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual offsite reading with the offing. We really appreciate you all joining us. This is our final event for our inaugural virtual book fair extravaganza, I guess. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. We're really excited and honored to be sharing reading and conversation with the writers here today. Yeah, so I'm going to let us just jump right in just for an overview of the event this evening. Each of our readers, I'll read our bios up top, then each of our readers will share, and then I'll get us started on a little bit of conversation, and then we'll get into some audience Q&A. I guess I also should say I'm Lucia LoTempio. I'm a reader here at the offing, and yeah, just really excited to be here. Okay, so let's get into it. Let me read our bio. So Justin Phillip Reed will be reading first. So Justin Phillip Reed is an American writer and amateur bass guitarist whose preoccupations include horror cinema, poetic form, morphological transgressions, and uses of the grotesque. He is the author of two poetry collections, The Malevolent Volume and Indecency, both published by Coffeehouse Press. His hybrid collection with Bloom Upon Them and also with Blood, a horror miscellany, will be released in fall 2023. Born and raised in the PD region of South Carolina, he studies traditional martial arts, participates in alternative rock music cultures, and enjoys smelling like outside. Okay, up next is going to be Kaitlin Chan. And I want to give an extra thank you to Caitlin, who is calling in from like a totally different time zone in Hong Kong. And we're really, really grateful that you made the time in your morning with us. So Kaitlin Chan is a comic artist and cultural worker from Hong Kong. Her debut graphic novel, Homecoming, is forthcoming from Shirley Books in 2023. Her comics have appeared in The New Yorker, Popula, The Margins, The Offing, amongst others. A co-founder of the mobile zine book collection Queer Reads Literary, she also produces her own zines. And then last but certainly not least is Allie Black. Allie Black is a writer from Cleveland, Ohio. She is the recipient of the Academy of American Poets University and College Poetry Prize for her poem Kinsman. Her work has appeared in December, Jubilat, Literary Hub, The Offing, and elsewhere. Her first book of poetry, If It Heals at All, was selected by Jackie Shelton Green for the New Voices series at the Jakar Press and was named a finalist for the 2021 Ohioan Book Award. Okay, so that's enough from me for now. I'm going to pass the mic over to Justin.
So this is some kind of ekphrastic essay slash commentary slash I'm not exactly sure, having to do with 1992's Alien 3, which is turning 30 this year. And it's one of my favorite films, but it's probably the most hated of that entire franchise. So I'm gonna get started. This is titled Awaiting Acknowledgement, Alien 3. My problem is, for all my wet, hot sniffing after existence as a different creature, I'm still some kind of man. I expect life-altering phenomena to present as brief explosions of epiphany, violent outbursts of correction, righteous killer instinct erupting from my chest, revolution, not just now, but immediately and impermanently. Acts of rebellion as gory assassinations of politicians, plutocrats held for ransom. Here is Charles Dutton's grimace going, nobody never gave me nothing. Just as American as it wants to be, as I am, not wishing to admit that everything I imagine was imagined for me. My dread should be similarly ejaculatory, exhausting and removable. Therefore, I don't know what to make of this music, of the one swollen note held in mutating 20th century Fox's regal fanfare into elastic hopelessness. The opening of Alien 3 is dreads declaring the rolling hills of its sovereignty, its stamina of suck. shots of blood, fire, and digitally scanned body violation bisect the list of men whose names, mounted in deep space, need punctual credit for their creativity. Screenplay by David Giler and Walter Hill and Larry Ferguson, directed by David Fincher. In case it wasn't clear, let the onboard computer be the first to tell me stasis interrupted. I come into this thinking I know everything. I know how a quadrant of planet convinces me of its innocence when a terrible vessel breaks across its luminous curvature. I know that the jettisoned crash landed pod contains one live human adult, one dead human child, one defective android, one dead human adult, two xenomorph embryos, and hitherto all of my narrative attachments. I know that Lieutenant Ellen Ripley, twice a final girl by now, what in the 80s Carol Clover determined, quote, a male surrogate in all things Oedipal, a homoerotic stand-in, the audience incorporate, end quote, is a gender trouble. And as the audience, I think I know Ripley's story. She fights, survives, and loses a child, then fights, survives, and loses a child. And by the end of this film, dies giving birth to the parasitic offspring of her nemesis, her predator and prey, her erotic counterpart. It appears to be this way with nemesis, with narrative, with the moire and their yarns, with white men's authoring white women in some protrusion in/of the dark, with Black people in the prison industrial complex, it would appear. When Clemens, a sensitive and lipless medical officer, lifts Ripley Lois Lane style from the wreckage, the residue of work saturates her. And why shouldn't even she, science fiction cinema's paradigmatic proto-feminist, that's Adeli Funama, look like the levels of hell she descends? She's fallen a long way from the bright white cotton of the first film, its single alien, the gulps of vacuum sealed shuttle air between her goosebumps and its crevice packing, salivating. What simple, timeless threat. Now in underwear, the color of morning and ineradicable creatures in space, she awakens to penetration, Clemens's needle. Ripley, hitherto physically invulnerable, has a fucked up left eye. Hitherto impermeable, she unknowingly incubates an alien queen, the reversal of all her previous duress, her negation, and then fucks Clemens, officially abdicating by horror law her final girl status. Quote, I hate to be repetitious about such a sensitive subject, Clemens says. Sex with Ripley isn't merely transactional, it damns him too. There is a dark, evasive fatality slipping through the tubes again. There are incarcerated men who have been reborn in the bosom of God and not since tempted by a weakness of the flesh. Clemens's allegiance would have been more to Ripley's person than to her body, which must be allied to the alien and in service to the queen. For the sake of tension and stamina, he's the kind of company she can't keep. The inmates are a company kept to itself, a stasis interrupted by Ripley's coming. The company proper, Ripley's abusive, obsessive former employer, keeps coming. Previous films in the franchise asked, don't you too, viewer, feel both isolated and targeted? But this film follows every living being in the vicinity except the head lice. It says, viewer, your vulnerability is as tenable as these zealous, oily, convicted rapists and murders are relatable, given two scenes of vapid characterization. This is a distant world of empathy from what aliens demanded for US Marines. Viewer, part of me always resents aliens for that. The year is 2179 CE. Private prisons not only continue to exist, but also occupy derelict planets in the galaxy's outer veil. The inmates of Fury 161 are what simmers in the soup of desolation, risk, and unpaid labor. Surely the homosocial breeds misogyny, xenophobia, and extremism, which is too bad because Ripley goes everywhere in the universe alone. And this prison is no different. They consider, quote, the presence of any outsider, especially a woman, a violation of the harmony. They, quote, forge lead sheets for toxic waste containers. They are 22nd century civilization's most abject discards, creating from one of its most toxic resources, vessels for its most abject discards. Who am I to refuse them their hate, their want to protect absolutely whatever delicate homeostasis still affords them individual character, familiarity to each other, someoneness among the 25 people that our capitalist descendants have marooned in the galactic fringe, far removed from any iota of liberal sentiment. The trouble at the limits of this empathy is that I would have readily accepted a hate fuck from 1992, Holt McCallany. The target, says Carol Clover, is our witnessing body. This is the aim of horror cinema, of slashers in particular. Quote, but what we witness is also the body, another's body in experience, the body in sex and the body in threat. Beyond both of these, I think, is the body raped. What I'm supposed to feel witnessing Ripley bent over a rail, jumpsuit to jumpsuit with McCallany's Jr. is the opposite of want, something like disgust, which I do feel, but feel toward myself and not in equal amount. What I feel isn't the limit of vicarious experience as a cinematic ambition necessarily, but rather the inevitable, quote, use of her as a vehicle for my own sadomasochistic fantasies, end quote, Clover. No other moment of the film so calls my body forward, certainly not the Black man rushing forward to rescue Ripley from this particular destruction. It is a sensitive subject. There are people who say such romantic things about vulnerability and beauty that no one ever beat it out of them, only to beat it out of them again on Tuesday and Wednesday. They who would infantilize me, bless my heart and my use of performance and secrecy to survive, think that the synonymy of performance and survival has phased out of function. They've been through all they've been through in order to say whatever they wish about compassion or how I must lack it to think humanity is an archaic pejorative. My suffering is millennial and unprecedented, so I fail to surprise them by acknowledging this. Once it was determined that I was not a well-rounded child, and in their subsequent effort to correct my oblong deviation, people whom I trusted to accompany me in mutual desire for my life almost ended it. How maudlin is this? I can tell these are the kind of people who believe in tough love and constant reflexive condescension because they can be forgiven for being flawed. They remind me of someone who tried in many ways to make revision the same as unconditional love for a young person and now prays every Sunday for redemption. I mean, the paternalism looks knee-jerk on them. They cannot fathom that in our fight forever and a day to be freely ourselves, some of us might be the casualties. A child is not even a sequel, but a remake. Their voices don't break that way. Their necks cut through a room like they can't be choked out. They aren't gullible. They've never believed a word said about them. Redemption comes to Ripley's attempted rapist who baits the alien into a cell and once the doors seal behind them, screams as the caged beast rips him to drenched strips. The cell diminishes its fire in slow motion. A woman vocalizing, violins, swan song from an oboe. Dead, Junior is any man. He died doing a good or merely died, and his evils evaporate in what aspires to be beautiful. The end. Thank you for having me.
I feel like I just want to have a second to be like, that was amazing reading. Because most of the, responses we hear to film in popular media are like very clinical, and it's just really moving to hear something that's like affective and reflective and poetic and response to a film. So thanks for that, Justin. And thanks for going first. Lucia, may I ask if we're able to view each panel fully, or is it going to be cut off? Because I think that they're tall enough that like you can see the whole panel like when we go to the first one. Yeah, That's a good
toe?
size. Yeah.
Like, that good? Maybe.
Yeah. Or do you want me to, I also still have the button up if you want me to do it like one by one.
Do you want to
'cause I have
try?
Yeah, sure. I just don't want to like put pressure on you, but let's give it a go. I think I hit all the, oh, right. When I click the button, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think we can go ahead with your window.
Okay.
Cool. Although I am a co-host now. Maybe I'll give it one more go. Sorry.
Okay, sure.
I don't mean to be make it a little trouble. Okay. I've got these JPEGs up here, and then they might be going in a little bit of reverse order. But let's see. Great. Is this like legible for people? Cool.
Yes.
Thank you also to Lucia, Mimi, Ashaki, and the Offing for having me. My name is Caitlin, and this comic, I was trying to think about the way that like the intensity of friendship when you're a teenager, and sometimes the sense of time that you experience as adolescence is like very rich and feels infinite, but then, you know, at what age the like respectability politics and the idea of like who you're becoming and what your status is start to play into your friendships is kind of the main question at the heart of this piece. It's like a short illustrated comic, and it's basically because I had this very close friend in high school that people like always associated us as being a duo, and now that I'm a little bit older and I have to admit that like we're not friends anymore, like there's this kind of, you know, pain and a void in our vocabulary for the lack of words we have to talk about the end of a friendship. So I guess this piece is a little bit of a illustrated exploration of that. There's an old friend who I don't talk to anymore, and the universe keeps sending me signs of her. And I've got these drawings in blue and red of an imagined version of this friend with some lyrics from the like embarrassing pop punk music we used to listen to, like Blink-182. There's a drawing of a hand with a particular kind of watch that I remember she would always wear, and a drawing of album cover that we used to play all the time at our sleepovers. The second panel says, the theme park rides we used to ride are closing down. We went on the last day of every school year. And there's this drawing of these very particular rides at this very old school theme park in Hong Kong, which very recently, like a lot of things in the pandemic, just announced like, oh, we're just gonna, you know, terminate this business. And I guess I didn't realize like, you know, the art of having that kind of routine and stability at that age really meant something to me. And to see these kind of old businesses just close, I was surprisingly affected by it, even though I thought that it was just going to be like not a big deal, but it was kind of like the memories and like the time in my life was closing down also. So I felt a lot about that closure. The frontman of our favorite band in middle school just publicly opened up about having cancer. So I've got these two panels, one with like a throwback to 2010 where we would like lie under her duvet in her bedroom and listen to CDs on the iPod. And there's something about like sharing, like putting one earphone in each ear that feels very special and intimate that we just don't do anymore. And then the second contemporary panel on this page has a drawing of me at the time in 2021 reading that like Mark Hoppus from Blink-182 was going through this cancer treatment. And it just kind of made me feel like the passing of time, because when you're a teenager and then you have these young rock stars that you looked up to, you never think that like anything adult like cancer, like what happened to my dad, like could happen to like the rock stars that you look up to. And there's something kind of a little alienating about that and tragic about that. But I'm happy to say that Mark Hoppus is in remission now since this comic was published. Oh, okay, this is like odd that happens where like I can't get the order perfectly right. Let me just find panel 4. Oh yeah, this is panel 4. And I keep holding all this information in my heart because I can't tell her. So I was just thinking about like trying to illustrate that kind of feeling you have where like the universe is just dropping all these leitmotifs about this person that you miss very much, but then it's really too awkward or painful to break that ice wall of communication. So it just felt like I was like developing this giant repository of things I needed to share with her, or things about myself that only she understands. And then I just like didn't get a chance to articulate that to her. It's a little bit of a wordy one. Oh, and the previous one, the image description, is a drawing of myself holding my phone with like the 3 dots emanating from it, with like a little broken heart in my chest, and all the things I want to say just coming out of me like word bubbles. Our friendship dissolved around my social status anxieties. I went to a competitive private school, so this happened to me a lot. My peers largely became bankers, lawyers, and doctors, and I'm a cartoonist, freelance illustrator / facilitator of workshops, discussions, and gallery worker. And I carried a lot of misdirected shame in my first years out of college. And there's a little drawing timeline of us just going from 2009 to 2021, and the kind of ease and intimacy and like shared lexicon and vocabulary we used to have just really starting to eke away throughout the years, and like just feeling like every time we kept having to see each other, like a small bit of that kind of closeness would just kind of crumble away. And then, yeah, I remember people, you know, at the time making comments about the differences in like the universities we went to and the things we decided to major in. And I was thinking like, why does this even matter? We're supposed to be friends. But then, I mean, in certain elements of society, it does matter to people. And I hated feeling like I was going to lose this person over something that I feel is like so insignificant, but it just kind of gradually happened. My old friend and I stopped talking, and it's largely my fault. When you grow away from the social mores of your early life, it can be very lonely to look back on your past. So yeah, there's a drawing of my friend and I sort of like walking our separate ways on this road in Hong Kong, because the road signs here have this very specific phrasing, just "and," which I thought was kind of perfect. But yeah, it happened around the time we first, started working our first jobs, and like feeling like there was just not enough shared experience to form a field on which we could stand anymore. And there's also a drawing of me looking at my phone, reading, like, those of us who are on social networks might know, like, it's very weird to have your personal vulnerable memories like dug up by the algorithm shovel. Like on certain days, they'll send you a notification like, this is a photo of you from 10 years ago. And it's like a very raw thing sometimes to like look at a photo of you from 10 years ago. And the other notifications that I've drawn in this panel are like to do with like my peers becoming like angel investors and like buying houses really young. This is not all of them, of course, just certain peers. But then feeling like basically we were being put on this sort of scale of like income and respectability and access, and it is starting to become all very murky compared to just like when you're in school and you all have to wear the same uniform. It kind of feels like you're in the same social pool. So the last panel of the comic says, you never really know if people dropped you because you stopped being, quote, somebody, or if life just got in the way. And I've got this arrow pointing to the word somebody that says for networking, for favors, and guanhai, which in Cantonese is like your kind of like relations in a sort of social networky kind of way. And then I had this drawing of myself literally being recycled in the trash with a giant hand, which I know is a very overtly literal metaphor, but I didn't really have any other image to think of when I just felt like gradually feeling like I couldn't talk to anyone from the people I grew up around. And that's a very lonely thing because, the things you do when you're growing up from when you're 0 to 18 years old really shape you. And it's nice to have people in your life that know that part of you or remember you from that age. But when people don't think you're like worth talking to anymore, or I had also, this is like my projection, right? It's like my imagined inadequacy infecting and projecting onto my social relationships. So that's kind of the conclusion of that comic. And I guess maybe that wraps up my reading. We can go to Allie.
Well, thank you, Kaitlin. That was so nice. And thank you to the offering for having me. And thank you, Justin, for being here. I enjoyed your piece as well. I'm going to read just some excerpts from an essay that was published at the offing, and it is titled Queen of All Spaces. And this piece just really kind of talks about memory and family and identity. So here it is. Every dining room table is different. Some are completely clear. Some are always set. Some hold vases, centerpieces, or other decorative objects to help personalize the space. Our dining room table is always very generous to us. At any given time, you can find it completely clear or crowded with a bunch of items: a 3-wick candle, mail, books, my MacBook Pro, my husband's camera, a stack of money, chapstick, a pair of AirPods. Our dining room table is the queen of all spaces in our home. It carries our fears and secrets. It offers us a place to eat our meals, sit, rest, and reflect. I am conflicted whenever our table is packed with things. Sometimes the crowding symbolizes a thriving life because usually when it is packed, my husband and I are busy with work, clients, meetings, projects, and deadlines. Normally, this means money is being brought in and our creative minds are at work, a good thing. But on the flip side, the crowding can symbolize strain and dog-tired days. When it gets too crowded, I am reminded that we need to slow down, perhaps turn down a project or two, take a break, and then I clear the table off. I get paper towels and Windex and wipe off dust, eraser shavings, smudge, and cup ring marks. The clear table feels refreshing. It's as if we've opened up a new document in Microsoft Word. We get to start again. I grew up eating all of my meals at the dining room table. We had one of those hexagon-shaped tables with a glass top and 4 chairs. The backs of the chairs were rattan. A lot of Black homes had this set in the 1980s. The chairs resembled that famous peacock chair Huey Newton sat in when Eldridge Cleaver photographed him in 1967, except our chairs were shaped like a square, not a peacock. My mother would yell at us if she saw my brother or I trying to poke our fingers through the holes of the backs of the chairs. Sometimes I visit family or friends, and the backs of their chairs would be destroyed. Picture holes in the screen door. My mother would have had a fit. She wanted her furniture to look nice and last. She always kept a clear table. At an early age, we were being taught how to respect our things, each other, and ultimately ourselves. Completing chores and taking care of our belongings was not seen as punishment or work. Cleaning and keeping things clean sometimes felt like a celebration in our house. My mother would blast her music, usually something by Anita Baker, and we'd clean and sing and clean and sing. I always felt proud to have a dining room table. It was the first piece of furniture that I learned to really take care of. Clear it off, wipe it down, push in the chairs, act right at it. My brother John and I learned table manners at the dining room table. We couldn't put our elbows on it. We couldn't lean back in the chairs. We couldn't speak with our mouths full of food. We couldn't drink our beverage until most of our food was gone. We couldn't leave the table until we finished our food. We did not eat until everyone had their food and were ready to eat. We blessed the food before we ate. There was this one time when my cousin Daryl came over and we were trapped at the table because none of us could finish our peas. We were not leaving the table until we finished all our food. We longed to go back outside to play, but when my mother's mind was made up, it was made up. Daryl, my brother, always ate with their shirts off because we were usually always coming from the swimming pool that was across the street from our townhouse. They started playing with the peas by placing them in their front trapezius muscles. They said they were hiding the peas. We laughed so hard until we got in trouble for playing with our food. When my grandmother was still alive, we always had Sunday dinner at her house. We ate there on holidays as well. She cooked like she went to culinary school. Her cornbread should have won awards. Her Thanksgiving should be in somebody's award-winning soul food cookbook. And she could bake too. Her peach cobbler, sweet potato pie, and yellow cake with chocolate frosting were the best part of the occasion. At this time in my life, I was too young to sit at the dining room table. The dining room table was for the young adults and grown folk. I sat in the kitchen at the kitchen table until I was about 15 or 16. My grandmother's dining room table was wooden, long, and dark. She used a silky white tablecloth to cover it on holidays, especially Christmas and Thanksgiving. I remember the table always being packed with dishes of food. After dinner, we'd always play Pacino or Monopoly at the dining room table. Those were some of the best times. My dining room table stories lessened the older I got. One clear memory sticks out from college. It was 2000, and Erica Badu had just released her second album, Mama's Gun. My friend Bina was going through a bad breakup. She had been dating the starting running back, and things didn't work out between the two of them. It was a bitter breakup. We sat at her dining room table and listened to all of Mama's Gun in one sitting. When we came to the last song on the album, Green Eyes, we were frozen. It was like we were listening to a Billie Holiday song. We knew we were about to feel something enduring. The 10-minute song about Badu's breakup with Outkast's Andre 3000 Benjamin made Bina cry so hard and long, we forgot we were even listening to music. It's one of those moments we'll never forget, and every time we reminisce about it, we always mention the table. When I lived alone, I never sat at the dining room table to eat. Something about sitting at the dining room table alone felt like too much of a lonely act. But I always purchased dining room tables for my apartments. The one I loved the most was from Target. It was small and wooden, a four-piece set. I decorated it with a small table runner and four blue placemats. It was never set with dishes. Sometimes I'd have friends over and we'd sit at the table and talk for hours. This was during the time I had quit my job to record a spoken word album and go on tour. Ain't no telling how many dreams I fantasized about at that table. My Aunt Rosa has one of the prettiest dining room tables I've ever seen. It's a carved eight piece set. Ever so often, we get together for Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner at her house. Mostly everything in her home is white. Her table is always set with fine china. She usually has some kind of white floral centerpiece with two tall candles at its sides. The candles are never lit. The dinners at her house are always bittersweet because so many of our relatives are typically absent from them. They are absent because many of them have passed on. I often wonder how my mother would act at her big sister's dining room table. I picture them reminiscing, eating green olives from an olive tray, and laughing at everything and nothing, like two teenage girls. Now I sit at my dining room table every day. It is a four-piece set with a round glass tabletop. The actual table is a hand-me-down from my husband's brother, Foy. When Foy moved to California, he left the table behind. I bought a set of four chairs from Wayfair to match it. You would never guess that it's put together in this way. The chairs are a perfect match. So much happens at this table: conversing, eating, drawing, smoking, drinking, writing, reading, hair twisting and braiding, and game playing. A little while ago, Donald and I had one of the realest and most honest conversations we've ever had at our dining room table. I had been drinking white wine, so I was sort of all of in my feelings. We were talking about raising a child. We sat at the table for hours and hours. I wanted to know how raw and transparent we planned on being once we began raising a child. What will we tell our children about sex? When are we going to talk to our child about racism and what they will be up against in the world? How will we handle those rough conversations about generational trauma, illness, poverty, and oppression? Donald and I grew up very differently. I was sheltered. My parents were very protective when it came to exposing me to the harsh realities of life. We never talked about sex. No one told me about white supremacy. My mother didn't have a conversation with me about the alcohol abuse that runs in my family. We did not know the reason behind everyone's cigarette smoking addiction. If something was bothering my mother, she never shared it with us. Oftentimes, my mother would be talking on the phone with a friend or family member, and if I walked into the room, she would stop talking mid sentence and look at me with eyes that said, "You are too young to hear this." She did not have to tell me to leave the room. Her eyes said it all. I'd walk away longing for whatever story or gossip she was about to share. And my parents rarely argued in front of us. We never knew what was going on with them financially or emotionally. I can't even recall a time when I witnessed either one of them crying. John and I had the ultimate experience of just being kids. It was the opposite for Donald. He had to grow up fast. He was exposed to it all: violence, poverty, and crime. But Donald was not exposed to alcohol or cigarette abuse. His mother and all of his aunts did not smoke or drink. And unlike myself, Donald was the older sibling. He was responsible for taking care and watching out for Foy. He has stories about the responsibility of having to cook at the age of 9. He can tell you stories about how it felt and what it meant to be a latchkey kid. He witnessed his mother and father physically fighting. His mother talked to him about sex. A baby changes everything, she told him at 14. As a child, I was spoiled. Donald was an independent soldier. I grew up in Euclid, a suburb of Cleveland. He grew up in Cleveland on the southeast side, far from the suburbs. I was familiar with white classmates and teachers. Donald was not. My family only moved 4 times from the time I was born until I was 18. Donald moved at least 30 times in this time frame. So what happens when these backgrounds marry and make plans to raise a child? Will I instinctively want to shelter our child? Will Donald want to expose our child to all truths? Which topics will we hesitate to discuss early on? These were my questions, and this was our conversation. Thank you.
Okay, amazing. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Allie, Caitlin, and Justin. This has been such a wonderful reading to hear you all, and such a great end to the offings panel, but to me it feels like a really great beginning for AWP this year. So thank you all so much. I am going to sort of kick us off with a little discussion, but audience members, or I guess readers too, if you have questions for each other, if you would like to put those in the chat. I think we can all use the chat. Yeah, okay, yes, if you could put those in the chat, that'd be great. But yeah, let me get us started. I guess I would like to start actually with a question that sort of came to me as you all were speaking. I'm really interested in all three of you's attention to the particularity of a minute moment, whether it's in an object or a moment in film. And I would be really interested to hear you all speak to maybe the importance of the minute as maybe a lens for your work.
I can start. I was kind of just having this conversation with someone the other day, but the piece that I read literally came from me sitting at my dining room table one day and having this conversation with my husband, Donald. And in that conversation, I was so focused in on obviously what we were talking about, but the next day, it caused me to think about how often I'm sitting at that dining room table. I mean, I do a lot of my writing there, we eat, et cetera, et cetera. And that caused me to just have this flashback to every dining room table that I've ever sat at, that where I can remember these memories that felt important to me, especially, the ones about growing up and, some of these funny stories I remember with my brother and my cousin, and thinking about, how I learned to take care of furniture, just simply from, sitting at a dining room table. It was that piece of furniture specifically that taught me how to wipe things down, clear it off, dust, et cetera. So, for me, I think that this piece in particular, and because it's sort of like a collage essay, I thought it was interesting how just this one moment and this one piece of furniture sort of became a thread for me to think about memory and identity.
Yeah, and I will say I so admire that about your essay, Allie, about how the many objects I feel like are represented in the way the collage moves. I think it's really beautiful. Yeah. Justin, Caitlin.
I'm just thinking about rituals and daily moments, because there's also a part of Allie's essay that refers to I think being invited over for Passover, and then the idea of the seating, having certain guests of honor, and it's amazing how yeah, an object can become very symbolic of how we spend our little moments, which end up defining our lives, and how odd that is, and how it's that really careful observation and detail that makes stories feel like specific and lived in. And maybe Allie, you're already familiar with Carrie Mae Weems's like kitchen table series photography. It just was so evocative, thinking about all the different activities that take place in that room. And sorry, I'm like all in my memory feelings after hearing the readings. But yeah, I think small things they feel also like movable to us, like they can move us, but also like perceivable. And that's kind of why I feel like a lot of my work also starts from like a very specific moment, like maybe even just like the liner notes of a certain album or something, and then you can kind of grow something a little larger in scope from there. But there's something that feels perceivable and holdable as an artist of something that feels a little smaller. But I feel like I should pass the mic to Justin.
No, you don't have to. I think everything like I said is, you know, feels right to me. I mean, in practice, like the focusing on the quotidian, the minute, is always the way, because those are the things that are tied to memory, to sense, and to feeling, which is like the thing that I think we always eventually want to get to. Like knowing is certainly a part of it, but I think I don't know how to get to knowing without having like experienced a few feelings first. And I mean, on the other side of that is like, you know, if I'm trying to, my relationship with film and with media in general, I feel like I better understand my relationship to those things and other people's relationships to them via the small moments, via even like the small characters, because I think that those are places where we have less noise. There's a lot of like general, you know, people talk about film by saying like, you know, how did you like the film, in this very like summational way that I think is really unfair to actively interrogating this thing that we just took into ourselves, with all of its small parts operating still, with all of the small images and acts that we just witnessed. I think, yeah, I have to kind of like, because I take in so much media, I have to like interrogate it, looking at the minute, to just keep it fair to myself. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it's sort of following up on that a little bit, like another question I have for you all, like thinking about memory or recollection, or Justin, as you're speaking, maybe even just like witnessing of something, like sort of reflecting back on that. But if we think of memory or recollection as, you know, like reflective of the time that happened, like the time of the memory, but also like the time of us now expressing it, right? So like that tension between experience and expression. I'm interested to hear like maybe how you think about that when you go to write about memory, right? Like, I hope this is clear, both like the experience of it then and you, like the you are now writing about it. Like, does that like play into it at all, that tension there?
I sometimes feel as if when things are happening, the volume or intensity of the moment is so much that I'm like not able to translate or even talk about it. Like, so I think that's why art is a very like processing thing for me. And I'm like at 27 making work about like 5 years ago or something. So I think there's this way in which I don't even feel like I can talk about life or show life as it's happening, because as Justin was saying, like moment to moment, there are like minute shifts. And I like the way in his reading, it felt like in the movie, there are moments like you can feel like repulsion, but then also like attraction. There are things that are corporeal and things that are intellectual or social about the movie that you can connect to. So it's like there's so much happening, and that's the exciting density of life. But then also I feel like the way that memory plays into my work is that I need my work and putting things into whether it's a space of a page or the space of a panel, it is a way to kind of like take all of that like sensory intensity and like intensity of feeling and just try to like weave out some strands of it that other people could maybe recognize. But I feel that life is a lot. That's why memory in my work, it shows up a lot.
Yeah, I would just say, for me, I'm somebody who always says like, I don't remember that. Like I can never remember anything until it's time for me to write. I think when I'm, maybe because I'm like taking it more seriously, or I'm, really kind of focused on the memory, and I'm thinking about, all of my senses and trying to get the memory right. But there is a tension where I'm like, okay, is that how I remembered it when it happened? Now that I'm writing it, am I getting it right? So there is definitely tension there, but I would say that like for me, I'm always like forgetting a moment or a face or how something happened. And then when it's time to write about it, it's a little, I can ease into it a little better, which is interesting all in itself.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a like general response to this question, but thinking about Ali's piece and just like the single table being kind of this generative moment of like all of this recollection, all of these strands coming together. That's really overwhelming, right? And then it got me thinking about, I wanted to read something else tonight having to do with the film Ma. And that I generated most of that piece after this workshop with the writer Christina Springer, who brought a few things to this workshop, like tangible objects, and she passed around a bowl of Werther's butterscotch drops. My Nana used to have those in her house, and so I ate one of these at this workshop, and all of a sudden, all of these memories, like of like literal tons of objects in this house, like stacks of things on her dressers, what the couches smelled like. All of that came flooding back to me, and I had to like try to get it all down, and it was impossible. Trying to do justice to everything that my like small young body had collected, all of the sense memories that had accumulated in me. And so thinking about kind of the gap between having been that child in that house, just being there, not thinking anything much of it, to the person that I am now, who kind of has to interpret all of that. It's a trip. I don't know what else to say about it. Like I think I was telling lies to myself about myself, as far as like things that I thought I didn't care about when all of those memories came back to me. So it was a huge learning experience. Thanks, Werther's butterscotch drop.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any audience questions? Okay. I don't know, Mimi, should I ask one more question, or do you think, yeah, one more?
I think we have time for one more.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll ask one. Hopefully it will be a clearer path to the question this time. So I am interested in, especially like hearing you all read, and now sort of maybe knowing you all as like writing in many genres, or maybe in many ways. And so I'm interested in like the way maybe you view form in relation to like your topic. I think sometimes form can really showcase an intimacy with a topic, right? Sometimes it's at arm's length, sometimes it's really sort of enmeshed. Yeah, so I mean, how do you choose to use form, like in regards to intimacy? And you can use like an expansive definition of that word if you like, or yeah, maybe, yeah.
Sometimes I have difficulty telling apart form and style. I guess because I'm not like a professional writer and I'm not trained in writing or anything, but I guess the form is kind of like the shape and right, the sort of not style, but shape a slang takes. I feel like kind of promiscuous when it comes to form, in the sense of like I want my work to be more in a coherent voice and style that people can become more familiar with. But what I find is that the different things I'm dealing with in my work always result in very different visual and compositional approaches. So it almost, when you look at my portfolio, it looks like the work of like 10 different people. So I think I like to see form as a way to like metaphorically try on the different outfits of who you could be as an artist. Although I would like to be more consistent in form.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to figure this out. I mean, I'm a poet first, and so everything for me, I'm always like, oh, I have to start off writing this as a poem. And then, you know, I think about the different forms within poetry, whether it's a statsina or a haibun or, you know, whatever. And then from there, if it's not working as a poem or if I feel like I need more space, um, you know, then I'll think about, you know, the essay or, and then I think about, well, what kind of essay? You know, the Queen of All Spaces essay, I definitely wanted it to be sort of collage-like because that was how the different dining room tables from my past and present were like coming into my mind. They were like flashes. So, but I don't always know, you know, if I'm right in what I'm doing, you know, like as far as like, well, I'm a poet, so I'm just going to start off trying to write this as a poet. But I do think that when I have more to say, more to articulate, more to explore and investigate, sometimes I'll just automatically go to the essay.
I was taught that like the ideal relationship between form and content was kind of a marriage. And as I kind of like continue to write and as I continue to like develop a certain I don't know, collection of disillusionments about professional writing, one thing I realized was that marriage between form and content sometimes kept me from um, letting my content take the risk that it needed to take about what it was going to be. Like if that shape is determined, then the content itself kind of has these rules about its determination. And like I no longer wanted to participate in that to get to the expressions that I need to get to. So now I have kind of these like, you know, essays that are prose blocks that kind of dwindle into line poetry and then jump back out of it into like some collage. But I mean, I think too that kind of my favorite way of writing lately, or at least the most capacious one, maybe is a collage of at least of genre expressions, because I think my questions about form are now becoming questions about genre, in that I don't know anymore like what I'm supposed to expect from poetry as opposed to essay, or as opposed to like I think that there are things that I need from kind of either of those spaces, but again, I'm unsure about a lot of the delineations of either. And so, yeah, I think lately it's just kind of a mess. And as far as intimacy, um, it's been a lot more generative toward getting there, I think. because I'm trying to remove the pretense of either genre, like those specific like list of rules about like what is included in a poem versus the specific list of rules about how an essay is supposed to move structurally. Like I can just exploit both kind of as a brat, and I think it's helping me kind of see, I don't know, flaws and fun in the way that I communicate or need to communicate. And that's actually helping me understand how I do attempt to relate to other people. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing, your meditations on these questions and of course, sharing your work with us here tonight. I know I really appreciated it, and I know the offing appreciates it, and I bet the audience appreciates it too. So yeah, why don't we give like a round of applause as best we can on Zoom for Justin, Caitlin, and Allie.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much again. Thank you to our readers. Thank you to our audience. Yeah, we really appreciate you all being here. Anything I should share with everyone, Mimi, before we all go, or just best wishes and gratitude?
Yeah, just thank you for, all of you, like for supporting the offing, for reading, for submitting, for contributing. It's really, it's like a community effort. So we really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you all, and be well.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.